After my first marriage fell apart, I threw myself into building my business and mending the fractured bond with my sons, Kyle and Ryan. The split with their mother had been messy, leaving scars on all of us. But over the years, through patience and persistence, I'd rebuilt a semblance of trust with them. They were my pride and joy, the steady, reliable Kyle, and the vibrant, risk-taking Ryan. Together, they represented the best parts of my first life. Then Emily arrived. She was like a breath of fresh air, warm, intelligent, and effortlessly charming. She had this way of making everyone in the room feel special, a quality that drew me in during one of the lowest points of my life. At first, she seemed to fit into the fractured pieces of our family, easing the lingering tensions. The boys liked her well enough, though Kyle maintained his natural wariness of anyone new, and Ryan, ever the charmer, seemed to enjoy having another person in his corner. For a while, life felt almost perfect. My business was thriving, my sons were finding their way in the world, and Emily brought a lightness to my days that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. We married quietly, surrounded by close friends and family, and started a new chapter together. But perfection is an illusion. And lately, I'd started to notice the cracks. At first, it was subtle, a missed dinner here, a forgotten promise there. Emily was busy, she said, with her volunteer work and her book club. Then there were the mysterious phone calls she'd take in the other room, her tone hushed and laughter nervous. She'd brush it off when I asked, claiming it was just girls gossiping. Still, my gut told me something was off. Emily had always been upfront, her honesty one of the things I admired most about her. Now, her stories seemed patchy. The lies started small. She'd tell me she was meeting a friend for lunch, but when I'd call to check in, there'd be no answer. Once, she claimed she was running errands all afternoon, yet I'd seen her car parked at the park, a place she rarely visited alone. I tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to stress or the ebb and flow of marriage. After all, we'd been through rough patches before, and every relationship has its share of ups and downs. But as the weeks turned into months, the unease gnawed at me like a constant itch I couldn't reach. My sons, too, had begun to pull away in their own ways. Kyle, ever the workhorse, was consumed with his demanding career in finance. His phone calls were becoming less frequent, his visits more rushed. Ryan, on the other hand, was living his life with the recklessness of someone who believed he was invincible, bouncing from one passion project to the next, leaving a trail of half-finished ventures in his wake. I couldn't blame them entirely. I'd been preoccupied, throwing my energy into growing my business and managing the little fires at home. But something about their distance felt orchestrated. One evening, after a particularly long day, I came home to find Emily sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone. She didn't even glance up as I walked in. "Long day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Oh, yeah, just catching up on some messages," she replied, her thumbs scrolling rapidly. "Anything interesting?" She finally looked up, her smile a little too bright. "Just the usual. How was your day?" I wanted to push, to ask her outright what was going on, but I held back. The truth was, I wasn't ready for the answer. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the last few months in my mind. Emily's distance, Kyle's guardedness, Ryan's erratic behavior, it all felt connected somehow, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. In my heart, I knew I needed to confront her, to demand answers. But some small, fearful part of me whispered that once I opened that door, there would be no closing it. Instead, I resolved to watch and wait. Whatever was happening, I would figure it out. Emily had brought light back into my life, yes, but now that light was casting shadows. And I was determined to find out what was lurking in them. The unraveling began in small, almost imperceptible ways. A forgotten grocery list, a missed call that Emily never returned. She started to withdraw from our usual routines, the Sunday dinners we used to cherish, the morning coffees where we'd talk about everything and nothing. At first, I thought it was stress. Everyone gets busy, I told myself. But as the days stretched into weeks, I couldn't ignore the growing divide. Emily's explanations were becoming as thin as tissue paper. A book club meeting that ended late and left her smelling faintly of someone else's cologne. A girls' weekend where she sent a single photo of a glass of wine, no friends in sight. When I gently asked about it, her answers came too quickly, too rehearsed. "You're imagining things, Daniel," she'd say with a laugh, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. It wasn't just Emily. Kyle and Ryan were acting strangely, too. Kyle, who'd always been meticulous about calling to check in, had grown distant. His texts became one-liners, busy at work. Call you later. Later rarely came. Ryan, the family's golden boy with his easy charm and quick wit, was unusually evasive. He missed dinner at least twice a month, offering vague excuses about plans with friends or last-minute work stuff. I wanted to believe it was all a coincidence. But my gut told me otherwise. It was a rainy Tuesday when the thread of my life began to truly unravel. I was in New York for a series of client meetings, staying in one of those cookie-cutter corporate hotels that smelled faintly of bleach and disappointment. The meetings wrapped up early, 2 days ahead of schedule, so I decided to catch a late flight home. I didn't call to tell Emily. I wanted to surprise her. The house was dark when I arrived, save for the faint glow spilling from the living room window. As I walked up the driveway, the sound of laughter reached me, a warm, familiar laugh I hadn't heard in months. "Emily." I paused just outside the door, my hand hovering over the handle. There was another voice. "No, too." Carefully, I eased the door open and stepped inside. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. "Dad." Ryan's voice rang out, too loud, too forced. He stood near the fireplace, his hand shoved deep into his pocket as if hiding something. Kyle was seated on the couch, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff. And there was Emily, perched on the armrest, her face a mask of poorly concealed panic. "Surprise," I said, forcing a smile. Meetings wrapped early. They all exchanged a glance, a quick, furtive flicker of guilt that shot through the room like a lightning bolt. "Welcome home," Emily said after a beat, her voice a touch too bright. "We were just catching up." I nodded, pretending not to notice the tension that practically radiated off them. "Well, don't let me interrupt." But the conversation didn't resume. Instead, Kyle stood abruptly, muttering something about needing to make a call. Ryan followed, his departure marked by a quick pat on my shoulder. Emily lingered for a moment, her eyes flitting toward the hallway. "I should probably clean up the kitchen. There's tea on the counter if you want some." And then I was alone. That night, as Emily slept beside me, I made a decision. Something was wrong, and I wasn't going to rest until I found out what. I started small. Checking her phone while she showered, scrolling quickly through her messages. Nothing. She was careful, far too careful. But then, in her email, I found a forwarded message, one that made my stomach drop. It was from Ryan. "Dinner's fine, but don't let Kyle be so obvious next time. He nearly blew it." Blow what? I needed more. So, I turned to my sons. Ryan's laptop was the easier target, he always left it open, and tonight was no different. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Emails, chat logs, and photos. Photos of Emily. Her smile, radiant and disarming, captured on Ryan's phone in intimate moments that were never meant for me. Messages between the two of them laced with affection, longing, and a familiarity that twisted my stomach. But it wasn't just Ryan. Kyle's messages were there too, more reserved, less brazen, but no less damning. Where Ryan was reckless and passionate, Kyle was calculated, ensuring their actions wouldn't overlap, keeping their shared secret buried deep. My wife. My sons. Together, behind my back, in a web of betrayal I could hardly fathom. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen as the pieces clicked into place. Every missed call, every excuse, every moment of distance, they were all part of a larger, darker picture. Anger rose in me, hot and suffocating, but I forced it down. I couldn't afford to react, not yet. Emily, Kyle, and Ryan had been playing a game behind my back, but I was about to change the rules. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. They thought they'd gotten away with it, that I was too blind to see. But they'd underestimated me. And now, the game was mine to control. The plan began to take shape the moment I closed Ryan's laptop. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all churned inside me, threatening to consume what little composure I had left. But I forced myself to breathe, to focus. Revenge, if it came, would not be in the form of a messy outburst. No, I wanted precision. I wanted clarity. I wanted them to feel the weight of their choices, to see their lies laid bare. So I staged the perfect dinner. It started with a group text. Me, family dinner tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Just us. It's been too long. The replies were hesitant but polite. Emily, sounds great, love. I'll make something special. Kyle, sure, Dad. Looking forward to it. Ryan, count me in. They had no idea what was coming. The next evening, I set the table meticulously, the way Emily used to when we hosted dinner parties. Candles, cloth napkins, polished silverware. The irony wasn't lost on me. This wasn't a celebration, it was a reckoning. Emily was bustling around the kitchen when Kyle and Ryan arrived, both looking vaguely uncomfortable but putting on their best attempts at casual smiles. Smells good, Ryan said, hovering by the counter. Emily flashed him a quick, tight smile, her movements a little too hurried. Just trying to make it special. Kyle sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, his usual cool demeanor intact. I watched them all from the doorway, marveling at their ability to act like everything was normal. By the time we sat down to eat, the tension was palpable. I waited, letting the small talk flow around me, sipping my wine and nodding at their attempts to fill the silence. Finally, I set my glass down and leaned back in my chair, studying their faces. I want to thank you all for being here, I began, my tone calm and measured. It's been a while since we've had a proper family dinner. Too long, really. Emily smiled nervously. Kyle raised an eyebrow. Ryan glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I've been thinking a lot lately, I continued, about family, about trust, and about the choices we make. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. And I realized something. We all have secrets, don't we? Emily froze mid-reach for her wineglass. Ryan shifted in his seat. Kyle's expression darkened. Daniel, Emily said cautiously, what are you getting at? I smiled. I've been keeping a secret of my own. But it's time to share. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table. This isn't just any dinner. This is an intervention. What are you talking about? Kyle's voice was sharp, his eyes narrowing. Oh, Kyle, I said, shaking my head. You and Ryan have always thought you were smarter than me. Smarter than everyone. But here's the thing, you're not. Ryan's chair scraped against the floor as he sat back, his face pale. Dad, I don't know what you think you've. I held up a hand, silencing him. Don't. Just don't. Turning to Emily, I softened my tone. Emily, you were the light of my life. You made me believe in love again. But now, I see that light for what it was, a mirage. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in a silent plea, but I was already pressing play. The room filled with the sound of their voices, whispered plans, intimate confessions, stolen moments recorded from Emily's phone and extracted from Ryan's laptop. The messages I'd uncovered were damning. Emily's face crumpled as the audio played, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "Daniel, please. Don't." My voice was cold. "You don't get to plead now." Kyle looked stunned, his usual confidence shattered. "Dad, I didn't. You didn't mean for me to find out." I interrupted. "No, Kyle, you didn't. But you did mean to betray me." Ryan, the bold one, tried to speak. "Look, Dad, we can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, leaning forward. "How you both thought it was acceptable to sleep with my wife. How you conspired to lie to me, to steal the one thing I thought I could trust." Their silence was deafening. Emily broke down first, her sobs filling the room as she buried her face in her hands. Kyle and Ryan sat in stunned silence, the weight of their betrayal settling over them like a suffocating blanket. "I loved all of you," I said, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I gave everything to this family. And this is how you repay me? By destroying it from the inside?" Kyle lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. Ryan, ever defiant, muttered, "We didn't mean for it to happen like this." "No," I said, my tone sharp. "You didn't mean to get caught." Emily looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Daniel, I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What you did, what all of you did, is calculated. It's cruel." I stood, my hands trembling as I gathered my phone and the evidence I'd compiled. "This dinner was your chance to see the truth, to face the consequences of your choices. You've all betrayed me in ways I never thought possible." I paused, looking each of them in the eye. "And now, you'll live with what you've done. Together or apart, I don't care. But know this, you've lost me. For good." As I walked out of the dining room, their stunned silence followed me, the weight of their guilt pressing down on them like a tidal wave. It wasn't the victory I'd wanted. But it was justice. And for now, that was enough. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. For me, it was less about vengeance and more about balance, ensuring that the betrayal that shattered my world would not go unacknowledged. I wanted Emily, Kyle, and Ryan to understand the weight of their choices, to face the same kind of exposure and vulnerability they had forced upon me. In the days following the confrontation, the house became a silent battlefield. Emily moped around, attempting tearful apologies that I ignored. Kyle and Ryan called repeatedly, leaving messages that alternated between guilt, anger, and desperation. I listened to none of them. My focus was singular, ensuring their actions had consequences. The first step was Emily. She had always cared deeply about appearances, carefully cultivating an image of the loving wife and gracious hostess. So, I started there. I made a quiet call to a mutual friend, Sarah, who ran in the same social circles as Emily. "You know," I said with practiced nonchalance, "I thought you should hear it from me before rumors start flying. Emily and I are separating." Sarah gasped audibly. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. What happened?" "I'd rather not get into specifics," I replied, injecting just enough pain into my voice. "But let's just say it involved infidelity, and not just with one person." By the time the call ended, I knew Sarah's curiosity would do the rest. Within 24 hours, Emily's friends were buzzing with the scandal. Invitations to luncheons and events dried up. Her book club disbanded abruptly, members citing scheduling conflicts. Emily, once the queen of her small social kingdom, found herself isolated and humiliated. Next came Kyle and Ryan. Kyle's career in finance was thriving, largely thanks to a well-timed introduction I'd arranged years ago to a powerful mentor, Richard Grant. Richard and I went back decades, and his respect for me was unwavering. One meeting over drinks was all it took. Kyle's judgment isn't what I thought it was, I said, swirling my whiskey. I've uncovered some troubling behavior. Richard frowned, his loyalty evident. That's disappointing to hear, Daniel. I trusted him because of you. I understand, I said. And I don't want my reputation tied to someone I can't fully vouch for anymore. If you could, perhaps, reconsider his position in your firm. Kyle was handed a termination letter 2 days later. Ryan's punishment required a different approach. His carefree lifestyle was funded entirely by me, his rent, his car, even the seed money for his latest entrepreneurial endeavor. I cut him off overnight. His phone calls became frantic when he realized his accounts were frozen. Dad, you can't just. Yes, I can, I interrupted coldly. You want independence. Now you've got it. Let's see how far your charm gets you when you have to earn a living. The final act of my plan required a bit more finesse. Emily had begged for one last chance to repair our marriage, even as I filed for divorce. She couldn't fathom losing the comfortable life we'd built together, the house, the status, the wealth. So, I invited her to a charity gala, a final olive branch, or so I let her believe. The event was lavish, filled with the city's elite. I made sure to arrive early, greeting old friends and ensuring word of my recent troubles had spread just enough to create a buzz. When Emily walked in on my arm, heads turned, whispers following her like a shadow. She held her head high, her smile fixed in place, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself and made my way to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, tapping the microphone. Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. But before we continue, I'd like to share something personal. Emily froze, her smile faltering. Many of you know my wife, Emily, I said, gesturing toward her. A spotlight found her in the crowd, illuminating her startled face. She's been an incredible partner in so many ways. But recently, I discovered something about her that has changed everything. The room fell silent. I won't go into details, I continued, my voice steady. But let's just say that trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it's nearly impossible to repair. The whispers turned to gasps as I pulled up a series of messages on the screen behind me, blurry enough to preserve some discretion but clear enough for the intent to be unmistakable. The texts between Emily, Kyle, and Ryan played in slow succession. Emily's face turned ghostly pale. Kyle and Ryan, who had slipped into the back of the room unnoticed, stood frozen, their expressions a mix of horror and anger. For those wondering, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, I'm moving forward with my life. And I hope Emily, Kyle, and Ryan do the same, with a greater understanding of what trust and loyalty truly mean. I left the stage to stunned silence. The fallout was swift. Emily left the gala in tears, her reputation in tatters. The invitations that had slowed to a trickle stopped completely. Kyle and Ryan, facing the public embarrassment of their exposed betrayal, disappeared from the city's social and professional scenes. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't joy, revenge doesn't bring happiness. But it was justice, and that was enough. They had underestimated me. But now, they would never forget what happens when you betray the one person who gave you everything. The house was quieter now than it had ever been. Without Emily's constant chatter, without Kyle and Ryan stopping by unannounced, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards to keep me company. The stillness, at first, had been deafening. I thought I'd hate it. But I didn't. In the aftermath of everything, I found myself waking up earlier, savoring the quiet mornings with a cup of coffee in the sun streaming through the kitchen window. I had stopped checking my phone for missed calls or messages from Emily or the boys. There was a strange sort of peace in knowing there wouldn't be any. It wasn't easy at first. There were nights when the weight of it all, the betrayal, the loss, the lingering sense of failure, sat heavy on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Emily's tearful pleas haunted me in those moments, her voice cracking as she begged me to forgive her, to try again. I'd loved her once. Deeply. But love doesn't survive betrayal, not a betrayal like that. And then there were my sons. My sons. Kyle and Ryan had been my reason to keep going after my first marriage fell apart. I'd worked so hard to rebuild our relationship, to be the father they needed. And yet, they had turned around and destroyed the one thing they knew mattered most to me. I'd spent countless sleepless nights trying to understand why. Had I pushed them too hard? Had I been too distant, too consumed with work? Or was their betrayal not about me at all, but about their own weaknesses, their own flaws? In the end, I realized it didn't matter. The why couldn't change what they had done. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Kyle had taken a job in a smaller firm in another city, far removed from the glittering opportunities he once had. Ryan, as expected, struggled more. Without my financial support, he was forced to sell his car and move into a modest apartment, working odd jobs to make ends meet. They both called, of course. Left messages that I listened to but never returned. "Dad, I messed up. I know I did. I'm sorry." That was Kyle. Always pragmatic, trying to fix things. "Please, Dad. I need you. I can't do this alone." That was Ryan. The charmer, still believing he could talk his way out of anything. But this wasn't something I could fix for them. They needed to face the consequences of their actions, to understand that their choices had cost them dearly. Months passed before I saw them again. It was Thanksgiving, of all days. I had planned to spend it alone, content with a quiet meal and a book by the fire. But around noon, the doorbell rang. Standing there, awkward and hesitant, were Kyle and Ryan. They looked different, humbled, worn. Kyle had a box of my favorite cigars in his hand, and Ryan clutched a bottle of wine. "We thought maybe we could, come in?" Kyle asked, his voice tentative. I studied them for a long moment, the cold November air biting at my skin. Then I stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. "We didn't talk about it, not that day." They apologized again, and I nodded, but I didn't say much in return. We ate in near silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between us. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Emily, on the other hand, was a chapter one had firmly closed. The divorce had been finalized quietly, and she had moved out of the house. Occasionally, I'd hear her name in passing, someone mentioning a chance encounter or a rumor about her struggles to rebuild her life. I didn't feel joy at her downfall. Just a strange, quiet detachment. She had been a part of my life, an important part, but that life was over. In the solitude of my evenings, I often reflected on everything that had happened. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I had gone too far. Was I cruel to expose them so publicly? Was it justice, or had I veered into vengeance? The truth is, I don't know. What I do know is that I couldn't let their actions go unanswered. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wanted them to understand the gravity of what they had done. They needed to see that betrayal has a cost. That trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. I sat in the living room one evening, staring at an old photo of the four of us, me, Emily, Kyle, and Ryan, on a family vacation. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Or maybe we were just pretending. I loved them all once. And in my own way, I still do. But love doesn't mean absolution. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go, even when it hurts. Would you have done the same? Or is justice just another word for vengeance? I can live with my decision. But could you?